The elementary school years. I went to Cook School in Midland, Michigan, and around the time right before elementary school, I didn't do any preschool. That wasn't as common at that time in 71, 72. I had an operation for a hernia muscle, and I still kind of remember going to pick up a brick, and I was into building things a lot, you know. I had a little tree house, and I don't know what I was going to do with that brick, but it probably involved building something. And I remember this pain down at the base of my stomach, but it's all vague. So I went there. I remember just being very uncomfortable. I remember turning around to get some shot in my butt in the hospital bed and just feeling like this is horrible. And I guess several months later had to go back, and that I remember in terms of having built this tent in the basement and just was kind of just sitting there quietly and hearing my mom and dad come downstairs to get me, and I already knew what I was going to get into. So now I have two cuts, and it's around my root and second chakra, kind of in between them. And I think symbolically at that time, my parents were about to get a divorce, and I was feeling it. I was a sponge, you know. Energetically, I could feel energy all my life, I think, but I think it manifested as these two cuts, mom, dad, together, apart. And I remember, like, years later, feeling self-conscious in my late adolescence, early adulthood, that if I was with somebody knew intimately, they might think that I had had a sex change operation. I used to have ovaries, and that's why there were cuts there, which showed the amount of confidence I had in my ability to communicate or whatever as a young man. The basement reminds me of just, I loved being in the basement. I created a fun house. I remember creating a haunted house, and I would charge neighborhood kids a nickel or whatever was the going rate to go through these things, and it just felt like it was symbolic of my little early entrepreneur coming out and just loving to create things. Now, I've created a lot of websites and created a lot of stuff on the internet, informational wise, and so I think then it was about physical, like giant Legos I'd like to build, you know, like a car or a house or just all kinds of contraptions. It was just a lot of fun. And in the basement I would also, they had crawl spaces, and this would be where old catalogs would go to die and decay. And I don't know how my family got so many JCPenney and Sears catalogs. They must have put those things out monthly, and they were huge. So what I'd do is I'd go in to these little spaces and take out magazines, and I would collect pictures of women in bras. And this is like years before I knew about sex or anything, but I liked pictures of women in bras. And I remember my little cousin once was coming down the hallway. I'm looking at him, and he's coming down the hallway pushing my G.I. Joe van, I believe it was, or it actually might have been, I think it was $6 Million Man. I don't think I had G.I. Joe, but I think it was $6 Million Man van. And there's a little trail, the side of the van was open, there was a little trail of broad women falling out of it, and he was pushing it towards the opening that would show my shame to my mom and my aunt. And I just darted down the hallway. I'm like, no, you're gonna break it, you know, as if that was the problem. It was my secret shame being revealed. And another thing I thought of in terms of my early experiences was my dad and my stepmom. He cheated with a woman in Norway, which was a catalyst for the ending of their divorce when I was 5. He brought her back to the States and helped her learn English, and you know, they had a relationship. And every woman, he married 3 women after my mom, and they were all older. I think it was part of his wanting a mom. And so they were all fairly significantly older, I thought, as a pattern. And so my sister and I didn't like this second wife. She would always sit and turn away. The door to our home when he would pick us up was over here, and she would just sit and look the other way. And it always felt stiff, but even though we didn't like her, we didn't want my dad to abuse her. And once we were in a camper at my grandparents' where they were building their new home, and so the home wasn't ready to live in yet, so we were staying in this pop-up camper type thing in bunk bed. In the middle of the night, we heard, my sister and I were in the upper bunk, and we heard this like thud, like boom, and it was horrible. And my dad was like, "There's plenty more where that came from." And there probably was, and there probably was a lot of other abuse, but that was the time we heard it, and she was whispering, "You bastard." And my sister and I just laid there, because we hadn't been exposed to violence in person before. We were just sitting there, laying there just tight, and just didn't want to move, didn't want him to know. And he would bring it up later on, wanting to know if we heard anything this one time, and my sister and I would just deny it. And it was like 3 different things, and he never got a chance to process about that, but we were too uncomfortable to hear about it. At school, I just kind of went along with it, and I think I was really good in math. I remember winning these flashcard competitions a lot, and once I made a classmate cry, and in that same class, he and I were grounded from recess because we didn't want to talk about what we wanted to be when we grew up. We thought it was personal. I wanted to be a map maker, and he wanted to play football. And it's funny because I see my interest now in like creating maps for reality and understanding maps of reality symbolically, how we travel through life. But back then I was making maps of neighborhood, and that got into my interest in architecture and homes. And with football, this other guy, I think there's symbolism in that because I still enjoy watching football. If it's a good game or a team that I'm interested in or whatever, and that doesn't correlate well with being the spiritual man supposedly, but I like the strategy, I like the aesthetics, I like the just the I think it comes back to mostly the logic and strategy that's utilized in games. So I think that this early kid's shame was reflective of my current, any remnants of shame that I have. I don't have much because I see things as about yin and yang and all that balance. I would go a lot on my bike to a nearby forested area that had like ponds, and one of the greatest adventures was to try to create a little raft out of some styrofoam or other things found. And to me that was just euphoric, to try to like navigate through this pond. It was a very isolated area. Sometimes I'd go with a friend, sometimes by myself, but it just really felt like a neat little sanctuary that was just really close to my home. And I had friends, but I don't know, I didn't have close friends. I guess, I don't know, that age, I mean, I guess they were close for that age, but I really was comfortable with my own energy, which is reflective of where I'm at today as well. So I think there's some symbols of who I was to become. I remember seeing a kid across the street who was like a friend, but not somebody I felt close to, I guess. He got kicked in his butt by his dad in the front yard, and maybe my sister was there or I just told her about it, but we thought it was funny. And talk about a lack of empathy, like the kid squealed out, and I was thinking about this, like what did I want to share in this current autobiography thing. I was thinking about the connection with cartoons, of watching, Bugs Bunny was it. It seemed like that show was on like for 3 hours or whatever on the weekends, and there's so much physical violence as comedy, and so there was a like physical comedy element to this, but when I think back on it, I think, ugh, that's not too funny at all. So in my grade school years, I went along, and I can't think of any other big things that happened. I was a very content kid, comfortable in myself, didn't have a lot of contact with family, mom and sister. We had babysitters or caregivers a lot. She was either my mom was at school or teaching late when we got home from school, so had a lot of other people coming in to kind of watch after us, and got used to that. But don't remember a lot of contact, you know, emotional connection, just people doing their thing. I think the disengagement of my family started at a young age. So that's my grade school years.